So what we're referring to here is the features of the products and services which are required by our customers or by a set standard. And really what we're talking about is the degree to which a set of inherent characteristics fulfill their requirements. So when you go to buy something, you have a set number of requirements that you wish for that to be. If it was a television, you've got set requirements. If it was a piece of clothing or even a piece of food, you've got set requirements that you expect from that. And that's really what quality is defined from a supplier's point of view, or yourself as a business. Then what you're wanting to do is ensure that you meet or exceed those set characteristics. And in terms of quality management, it's what an organization does to ensure that its products and its services satisfy those customers' requirements. Also ensuring that they comply where appropriate to regulations and standards for those products and services that you offer. Ideally, you want to enhance your customer satisfaction because you want them to come back more and more. And you want a system that will work to reduce errors within your organization and ultimately achieve continual improvement of its performance. And what really is a management system itself? Well, it's what an organization does to manage its processes or activities so that its products and services meet your organizational objectives, such as satisfying your customers' quality requirements, complying with specific regulations, possibly meet certain objectives, and comply possibly with standards. And those standards could be one of those ones that we mentioned today, which is the Quality Management System Standard, ISO 9001. To be efficient and be effective, an organization has to manage its way of doing things by systemizing its activities. We want to do that so that we ensure that nothing is missed out. And we also want to do that so that we ensure that everyone is clear about who is responsible for what they are doing, when they're doing it, how they do it, importantly, why, and where that happens. It's important that these different activities that we systemize have clear instructions and clear records of how that's done. So why do we do this? What are the benefits? Well, we want to ultimately improve quality. By improving quality, we want to reduce error. And when we talk about error or we talk about waste, we mean waste throughout the whole process from start to end. That can be scrap, rework, complaints by our customers, additional costs, error within our workplace, ineffective use of time, etc., etc. We want to have improved efficiency and productivity in whatever we do. We want to ultimately improve the level of motivation, cooperation, workmanship, and quality awareness within all our staff, our supply chain. In doing so, improved communication is a huge benefit of a QMS. Everyone's aware of what the goal is and what you're trying to achieve. And ultimately, you want to have greater control of the processes and activities that you do. And if you have good communication and you have everyone working on that same journey, that's something you can focus on. A greater focus on continual improvement. One of the key features of an effective quality management system is one that continually strives to improve on your products and your services. Often, not always, better quality means more satisfied customers. And remember, when we are talking about quality, we're not necessarily talking about a luxury product. We're referring to the quality of the service that's been provided or the product that you've provided. As well as this, the benefits of a QMS can also bring improved prospect opportunity. If someone has experienced exceptional service from your organization and they give you positive feedback on that, or they may share that with other people within their industry, then your prospect opportunities can increase. There is nothing better than gaining additional clients through one of your clients selling your service on or your product on as part of word of mouth. And of course, When that grows, ultimately you get a better market image. So let's talk a little bit about ISO. We're going to be discussing in more detail ISO 9001 later on in this course, but a little bit for those who are not aware of ISO. So it's the International Organization of Standardization. It's based in Switzerland, and it's made up of over 100 national standard bodies. There are probably about 20,000 or so standards in the ISO portfolio that can be used to develop systems. However, it should be understood that many of them are very specific for certain products or industries. The one that we're going to be talking about today is just 9001 for quality management system. They're generally developed by technical committees and shared. But one important thing to understand about particularly this standard is that this is a standard that can be used globally. It's a standard that can be used in any industry and effectively by any organization. So it's a very generic standard. It will not tell you exactly what you have to do, but it will give you a guideline around what's expected of you to demonstrate your quality management system control. So just a little very quick background. We were operating in a 2008 version of the standard up until September 2015, and that's the current standard that's in place at the moment. It's referred to as ISO 9001 2015 revision. One of the key features about the revision that has been long waited for is that they adopted Annex SL. Annex SL, to put simply, is just a template in which the ISO organization use to develop the new standards that come out. This is why when we refer to integrating standards, it makes it much more simpler to do. And there is other training sessions and other videos that we'll be displaying on YouTube and LinkedIn discussing about how integration of standards work, integration of different systems work, and the benefits from that. So when we talk about ISO 9001, we talk about a structure. As I said before, it's a standard that's generic and provides guidelines around a structure for any organization in any industry. When we look at that, the key areas we have to focus on are 7 areas within that high-level structure, which have sub-levels and what's referred to as clauses and sub-clauses. And those are the context of the organization, leadership, planning, support, operations, performance evaluation, and improvement. So what is it about? So it's a uniformity of standards. So there's a set number of clauses now in many of these systems. There's also the ability to integrate, as I said, much more seamlessly and with other standards within your business. And it's also much more focused now on service organizations as well, rather than using terminology much more focused to manufacturing and products. So what are the benefits of a QMS when we're talking about 9001, in particular for organizations that are considering going to that journey for certification? Well, first of all, there's a recognition and credibility as it's a global standard. And I think it's probably important to mention at this point that I think internationally there is over 1.2 million organizations that have certification to this standard. It is the #1 globally recognized quality management system certification, and I think the #1 certified standard in the world currently. This certification can give you the ability to bid on new contracts. It can improve your corporate quality image. It may allow you to motivate your supply chain to look to obtain the same type of certification, or at least conform with the requirements of it. You can also use it as a possibility to try and reduce customer audits. If you receive many audits by your customers at your site, hopefully if you demonstrate your third-party certification audit, then you can reduce those audits, which of course is a good benefit because it reduces the time that you have to put in to fulfill those audits. It can give you a competitive edge. Not just the certification, but in terms of the full quality management system itself. If you are working it effectively and efficiently and really getting improvements from the system, then you can remove as much error in your systems as possible, give you a much more competitive edge to be more competitive with your client, with your competitors in terms of financial and quality. Increase buyer confidence. So people who are working with you get some confidence that you meet these requirements. You can have a higher customer satisfaction in terms of the feedback you get. And of course, it's important to recognize internally that people that come to work for you may recognize that you work towards a good quality standard. So one of the things, getting into the details about the system. So a QMS is about the way an organization goes about its work, how it actually operates. It's not a product requirement, and it's not specifically a service requirement. It's seen really as a process requirement. It can be used by product manufacturers as well as service providers. And the most important thing to recognize about when we talk about a process requirement, it's the features, in terms of how an organization operates. It's the links between departments, between activities that happen. So what do we really mean by a process? So it's all work within an organization generally involves a process of one type or another, or a suite of processes that link together. So what are these? It's the things that go into an activity. Okay, so it's the things that happen ahead of an activity. So it's feeding in to your organization, your department. Then these activities, then these inputs get worked upon. So there's a conversion, and effectively something comes out at the other end. So simply put, you have an input, an activity, and an output, and that output from the activity then ultimately can and often does become the input to another activity. And if we think of that within our own companies, how our processes work and link together from the point of possibly winning a contract to fulfilling that contract and being paid for it, there's a multitude, depending on the complexity of your business, there's a multitude of activities with inputs and outputs that must happen before the next one does. Okay. Typically, all processes can sometimes be referred to having a supplier and a customer. That's your input and your output. And often, pretty much always, processes require some use of resources, whether that be equipment, humans, whatever it may be. So going into a little bit more detail about what we refer to as the process approach and why it works very well. Understanding consistency and meeting the requirements, the consideration of processes in terms of the requirements, and achieving effective process performance. So if we think about that in more simplistic terms, if any of you have ever worked in an organization with the departments on the left-hand side that's depicted by this old picture, then what we've got here is a very non-productive, non-communicative business where departments are working in silo, they're not communicating very well with one another, and almost what you have is broken processes that are not perfectly linking together. On the right-hand side, what we're seeing here is that processes are communicating very well, and it's important to recognise that processes further down the chain of events are able to communicate right back to the beginning as well, so that everyone is clear on what the expectations are. So let's assume, therefore, that the different departments can be customers as well as suppliers, and they're communicating well with one another so that they have a more seamless link across. So they want to try and show that these departments work in a way that they are effective and efficient. So when we look at the process approach in terms of the quality management system from ISO 9001, we have the inputs coming in as the organization and the context of how the business operates, what our customers' expectations are, what their requirements are, and of course we need to consider the needs and expectations of other relevant interested parties. When we look inside the quality management system, we refer to a PDCA cycle, which refers to plan, do, check, act. This is a very simplistic, old methodology, but it works extremely well and is used across a multitude of different standards to demonstrate a cyclic approach to improvement. So plan what it is you're going to do. And when you plan what you're going to do, when you go about doing it, you often need various resources and support to deliver that operation. When you've completed doing the activity, then you want to do an assessment to check, has it worked well? Have we delivered what we said we wanted to deliver? Have we manufactured or produced what we want to do? Have we installed the system and tested it to ensure that it works to the specification and expectations of our customer? Therefore, that falls under what we refer to as performance evaluation. Based on that checking and evaluation that we've done, we want to drive improvement back through the business. So we want to act, and the important thing is we want to act on that improvement. We don't want to just record it somewhere in a spreadsheet. And in situations like this, I sometimes refer to a lessons learned activity. And I did a previous video talking about this. I think lessons learned as an improvement activity is a fantastic tool, but many organizations focus on recording lessons and they actually do not learn from those lessons, so they don't act upon them. If you're acting upon them, then the cyclic approach should be feeding back into your planning activities so that your operations adjust, so your performance evaluation is showing up improvement over time. And ultimately the output from that are the results of your QMS showing that your performance is improving, you have greater customer satisfaction, and of course that your products and services meet the requirements. So looking at this in a slightly different way, we want to bring in and discuss a little bit more about the process approach. So the purpose of the process approach is to enhance an organization's effectiveness, but also importantly to enhance its efficiency in achieving its objectives. So what do we mean by that? Well, ultimately we can throw everything at our processes so that we have an effective product or an effective service. However, we must remember that in a business, we are here to make money. We are here to continue operating, ideally grow if we wish that, hire new people, retain staff, and so on and so forth. So we want to be efficient in how we do that as well. So think about the output of the products and services that you provide. Yes, they can be very good. Yes, they can be very effective. But how efficient are we in delivering those? So what about looking at the results achieved versus the resources used? If we were to consider measuring that type of activity, and this session is not going to go into that in too much detail, but we do have other videos that talk about that and talk about the process approach, the cost of poor quality, so on and so forth. As well as the process approach, one of the key features about a quality management system these days is to think about it on a risk-based approach. And we refer to that, or the ISO standards refer to that as risk-based thinking. So the concept of risk within quality management system is the uncertainty in achieving your objectives. Many people possibly listening or watching this on one of our channels might ultimately come back to thinking about risk in association with human health and safety, or maybe even environment, the risk to environment. But this is a slightly different concept. So we're thinking about the risk of uncertainty in achieving our objectives, uncertainty in achieving 100% pass mark, uncertainty in achieving our expected output from our production lines, uncertainty in achieving our very low scrap levels, so on and so forth. So when we talk about risk, we're talking about what is that risk level in not achieving those objectives. We want to try and provide some confidence to our organization and to our customers that we can achieve these objectives. So one of the reasons of thinking about a risk-based approach is it allows you to focus your attention into the areas with the greatest uncertainty. These are the areas that can bring about huge improvement within your organization if you have a very effective quality management system that's working for you. Yes, I agree with certification. I think it's a good thing. However, I think it's also important to understand that I personally believe, and our organization believes, that certification is quite a low bar. If you have a very effective quality management system, certification should be fairly straightforward to achieve. And ultimately, if you want to try and raise above the bar, You want to have a really effective quality management system that is working for you, and you're getting return on your investment. You're investing into your quality management system in resources, in your documentation, in the cost of auditing, and so on and so forth. So you want to get a return on that investment. And thinking about from a risk-based approach, if you focus on the key areas that have the greatest uncertainty and the greatest risk to you achieving your objectives, then you can ultimately drive down those errors. So risks and opportunities, specifically within the 9001 standard, goes into a little bit more detail about how these risks can be managed and how your system is looking to enhance desirable effects and to prevent and reduce undesirable effects. So what is it when we talk about risk-based thinking? Well, it's a little bit like a preventative action. So we're taking actions to prevent a negative activity happening. And often it's part of a process approach like we spoke about before. So if we recognize the different sequences of events within our processes, we can look to see where the risks are, not just at the end of our production line or the end of our service that we deliver, but ultimately right through the processes within our organization. Look for the uncertainty, the weaknesses, the areas that have the greatest risks to us achieving our objectives. And this is where we want to put our focus. You know, we explain risk and opportunities in different ways, but one of the things we refer to is if we can minimize the risks within our organization, reduce the error, then ultimately we can be a more profitable organization as well. And one of the things I consider when we are talking about risk, to put it into simplistic terms, the fishbowl that we present in this slide is simulating a person moving from one home to another. Particularly this one is a small home to a larger home. There are risks in doing that. And if anyone has undertaken that as part of in their life, which I have, then there are always risks. We know what our objective is. We want to achieve that possibly bigger home or a home nearer the school, but we want to remember that there are risks in doing this. Those risks are varied, of course, depending upon who we are, where we live in, our own economic situation. But often we would go through those risks and understand. And one example of that, maybe we understand what our objective is that we want to try and achieve, but we may want to consider the risks of our own economic situation in terms of our working situation, the situation in terms of the mortgage interest rate, for example. These are all things that could be a little bit uncertain, and we may want to take a risk-based approach to that before we go through with it. So the only thing I'd really say here is successful companies intuitively take a risk-based approach. They intuitively look at risks all the way through their processes and take that approach from the start to the end of their operational activities. So there's no real requirement necessarily, we would say, to sit down and risk register everything. Often working these details within your organization and sharing it throughout your organization, you can tease out the areas of uncertainty. We would say that there's no harm in developing a risk register around that, particularly one that we refer to like business risks and opportunities. It allows you to sort of give you some attention and focus, and particularly tease out the areas which have the greatest risks or the greatest uncertainty in achieving certain process activities or objectives. So we think about risk-based thinking. It's a preventative action. We are undertaking this activity to prevent an uncertain outcome. Okay, it's not just the responsibility of management, it's everyone's business, and it becomes an integral part of the culture within an organization. Ultimately, if these things are communicated well throughout the business and they're understood throughout the business, then we get people thinking a slightly different approach. So when we talk about risk and we refer to it in terms of Swiss cheese, some may think, really, very odd to bring this up in a slide about quality. However, others who maybe have a background in risk management or a background in health and safety may understand what I'm coming to next. We'll come back to it in a few minutes. I just want to tease that out there, that we're going to refer a little bit to Swiss cheese in this model. So we spoke before about risk methodology in quality management systems, and there's no reason why you can't use a similar type of risk matrix and risk methodology as what you would do for health and safety or environmental management. However, it is important to recognize what those likelihood and consequences are in terms of quality management. So is it reduction in profit? Is it increase in scrap? Is it rework? Is it returned products? Is it dissatisfied customers? All of these things which have a negative impact on a business, and looking at the consequences of how those would happen. And importantly, if you use this methodology as part of a risk and process approach, you can look at these and try to identify earlier in your process route where these errors could occur and put more attention and detail in there. This is just a small example of a type of risk register that could be used. So I'm not going to dwell on that. This is another example where we look at different higher level type stakeholder risks within a process. So when we talk about process and risk, remember we spoke about the links between processes, the inputs, the activity and the output, and then we refer to risks within different sections within our processes. One of the things we talk about is a wall of confusion. And if you jump back to the slide that we showed where there was the organization with multiple departments with barriers between them, then ultimately those barriers between them in terms of confusion, in terms of the wall of confusion, this is referred to in terms of how communication occurs within an organization. So inside the development department here, what we're effectively saying is that they are passing on what they believe the operations department require. But because of that wall of confusion, the operations department may not have explained exactly to the development team what they need. And therefore, there's this wall of confusion. And ultimately, there is a risk there. There is a risk in this process because it's not linking very well together. And this is an area where you would say we want to bring some attention to. So let's jump back to where we referred to in terms of Swiss cheese. Excuse me for a minute. So why is risk like Swiss cheese? So when you slice up a Swiss cheese, then you have slices as depicted here with various holes in it. If we think about when we slice it, the controls are within the slices. So if we assume that each of these slices are forms of processes within our organization, it will help us explain a little bit better. It is important just to mention here that this has been taken and adapted from James Reason's Managing the Risks of Organizational Accidents, which comes from a publication in 1997. Very good methodology and has been adapted to demonstrate how it could work in a process and risk-based approach for quality management. So each layer that we spoke about in terms of cheese represents a process or a department or activities that happen within your organization that go, for example, from the earliest stages up to the end stages. First thing that's really important to mention here is that at the earliest stage of your processes, where you have or you intervene to control and make changes, this is where you have potentially the highest influence in those processes at the lowest cost. And the further through your process or operations and service activities, you have the lowest influence and the greatest cost. And let me try and explain that in layman terms. If we're an organization and we install pumps at new housing developments for the house developer or local water utility provider, So if we go through the requirements of the contract, the design, we purchase the material we need, we maybe do some process development in terms of mapping out the flow of the water and the returns and things. We then look at our production readiness in terms of how we're going to plan our teams around getting it out there. To do any kind of testing or an assessment beforehand, we might have to go to the site and review it. And ultimately, the operations of installing the pump, testing it, and all the health and safety and environmental requirements that come with that. However, if we think about right at the last stage there where we're doing our operational services, and there can be, of course, many stages after that in terms of completing paperwork and invoicing and so on and so forth, commissioning, etc. But let's take just this stage. If at the stage where we are installing the pump, that we as the service engineers then realize actually that there has been an error, a mistake has been made possibly in the acquisition of the pump required for that job. We have very low influence at this point, and ultimately potentially a very high cost, because what has happened is it's very far down the line, significant time and effort and resources have been put into this job, and ultimately the job cannot be complete. So we have dissatisfied customer, we have delays, we have impact potentially on other activities that we are going to be doing the next days in our production planning. We have to then go back and process, a return of that pump. We have to look at, well, where was the fault? Was it in the design, or was it, the purchasing team did not follow the requirements correctly, and why was that? And ultimately, if we go back through that process and look at it, and let's, I'm taking this from an example that I'm aware of, that actually the issue was not related to the people in the design team. It was not related to the people in the purchasing per se, because each of them did what they believed was the right thing to do. The problem was the communication between those two teams. The communication broke down, and the information that was required by the purchasing team was not explicitly requested to the design team, and the design team did not offer it because they didn't know it was required. There was assumptions made, okay? There was a risk in there because of those assumptions, because of that poor communication. And ultimately, that one mistake triggered subsequent other activities to continue and effectively get to a point where the job could not be complete. The impact on this type of activity is quite significant. If this is the sort of thing that you're interested in hearing a little bit more about, then I've got a couple of blogs and videos that we do on the cost of poor quality, where we dive in a little bit deeper on what some of the activities around the cost of poor quality actually are. And it's not just what often people think as being, directly what you can see as the errors, but there's a lot of underlying errors and contributing factors as well. So just focusing back in here, if we, as part of our quality management system, look at each of these slices and look at how they interact with one another. This is how our business operates. And where we have risks and uncertainties within here, and that might be from looking at data analysis from jobs that we've done, from services or provided or product that we've manufactured, or it could be based on error results. It could be based on jobs that have stopped, customer complaints, various different bits of information that can feed into us that we can use to make decisive decisions on what we will do to try and improve our business. If we look at that, then we want to try and understand, well, where are our areas of greatest risk, and where do we have to put our additional controls or additional quality levels of control to ensure those happen. And it is important to remember that the level of control that's put into to control those risks can be reduced over time as we become a culture of quality improvement within our organization. So this then harps back a little bit to Plan, Do, Check, Act again. I mentioned it a few slides ago, maybe 15, 20 minutes ago. And effectively what we're talking about here again is what to do, how to do it is the planning thing. Do what was planned. do what we expected and we were planning to do. And important, remember when we go back to the planning phase, that communication element with all of the different departments working as a process is the best way to look at it. Checking, so that our performance evaluation, did things happen according to plan? Did they take a little bit longer than expected? Did the parts not arrive on time? Did we go to the wrong site? Did the production line go down more often? Were there tooling issues? Were there machining issues? Were there human behavioral issues, human impact issues? All these contributing factors that we would look at in terms of what went wrong. And again, I'm going to mention about lessons learned. It's a very good way of looking at, okay, this is what we expected to achieve. We did not achieve it. Let's look at it and analyze it, and let's learn from it. And the most important thing is how to improve the next time. Act on it. Don't just say what you're going to do, act on it so that you can demonstrate it. This slide really just shows the interactions of, if we think about the process approaches, we've got the interactions coming in, we've got the inputs coming in, the interactions of carrying out the process, and the outputs, which often go and interact with another process. And if we look at the Plan, Do, Check, Act in terms of using the risk-based module, so we're looking at planning what we do, carrying out what it is that we're doing, checking that we're doing it, and driving improvement. It's important when we drive those improvements, it's not just in silo inside one department, one process, one activity, but it's looking at the interactions either side as well, all the way through the supply chain, all the way out to the processes and services we provide. Okay, so we've covered a little bit on the process approach, risk-based thinking, Plan, Do, Check, Act. So taking all of those things together is a very good foundation for a quality management system. So moving forward, what I want to do, I've left a case study in here as a demonstration on that. I won't go into that in too much detail, but people can review that themselves. And we've shown the methodology of using a risk-based register to understand that. What I want to do is just take a little bit of time to show you a slide that depicts ISO 9001 as a quality management system structure. And I want to try and show you that in a form that demonstrates and depicts the cyclic approach to the way that the standard has been written and why it is such a successful standard globally, because it uses the Plan, Do, Check, Act methodology. And as we can see, the planning element is quite significant. There is a lot goes into the planning element of a quality management system, where we're looking at what it is, the context of what we are, what it is we do, what interactions we have with interested parties, and understanding how our management system is going to fulfill the requirements. We obviously clearly need to have our leaders within our organisation. And when it talks about leadership, it doesn't necessarily mean the board of directors. It can mean your supervisors, it can mean management, it can mean people that act in that leadership type role that give guidance and governance and support throughout an organisation. It's important that they provide a commitment to this. It's important that they provide the necessary support that's needed to drive this type of culture within an organisation. They have to put in place a policy around what's expected, and importantly, they have to demonstrate the roles and responsibilities and authorities that are given to people to fulfil their requirements. Then looking at the planning clause, we're looking at the risks and opportunities, harking back a little bit to what we discussed before. We want to set ourselves objectives, and those objectives could be considering a risk-based approach. And then we want to think about when we make changes, whether those changes as a result of not meeting our objectives, and the analysis we get drives change through our lessons learned process or whatever that may be, or it may be just structural, significant changes that we make that could have an impact on our business, changes to our supply chain, changes to the places where we operate, changes to our production line, etc., etc. That's how we adapt and respond to those changes. That's important. So planning for changes is a key element of the structure of a quality management system. Then, of course, like any business, we require resources. We require resources, and depending upon your organization, it could be simply people, with computers, or of course it could be to the next level altogether, which it could be significant equipment, production lines, machines, tooling, etc., etc. And with that, we have to think about competence, the competence of our staff, the competence of our supply chain. How do we demonstrate the competence? How do we ensure that we give that competence if it's not already in place? And then looking further forward, it's the awareness. Do we ensure that everyone is aware of what it is that they need to do? Are they aware of the management system itself and their interaction with it? And how we communicate that information. It's all good and well having an effective documented quality management system, but experiences I had in organizations many, many years ago is those documented quality management systems were in folders and they sat on the shelf of a quality manager's office, and very rarely was that information shared with anyone else. People heard little bits and pieces about error, about scrap, things like that, but they didn't really understand what a quality management system was. So communication is really important. Good leaders driving communication through an organization is a real foundation of a quality management system within an organization. And of course, we have to demonstrate our documented evidence. Now, when we refer these days to documented evidence, it doesn't mean a bit of paper that's been printed and put in a folder. It means any type of information that we use or we record as evidence. So information on electronic systems, on cloud-based systems, and so on and so forth, videos, etc., etc. Then furthermore, we get into the operational activity, which is the do part. So we planned to achieve something, now we're going to try and do it. So it's how we plan our operations and control them, how we determine what the needs and expectations are and the interactions we have with our customers and our supply chain. Do we have an operational planning process? Do we look at how and when we're going to do things? What about our external providers? Are they simply just goods that we buy in? Is it simply just basic IT support companies, or can it be very significant supply chain requirements within our organization? Do we rely extremely heavily on them? And how do we control that from the point of bringing in a new supplier to the point of working with those suppliers? Remember, often a supply chain can be seen as a relationship. You need them just as much as they need you. So working with them is really important. And if that's something that can be troublesome and difficult and a little bit conflicting, then again, I would like to refer to the fact that we have another webinar video and blog we did on management of supply chain and how a relationship process works so much better. So you'll see that on our YouTube and LinkedIn channel. Then in terms of the development of our goods and services, which can include design and so on and so forth, and the production of how we provide our services and our goods, what release activities we use, whether it be testing, whether it be commissioning, whether it be competence assessment, whether it can be a third-party assessor, whether it be simply just confirming with our clients that they're happy with the service they've provided. And then, of course, within our operations, things can go wrong. And it's important to have processes and techniques around how we control these issues. Issues will happen from time to time, regardless of what company you are, from the biggest blue chip global organization to the smallest one-man business. Things will go wrong from time to time. Important thing about when things go wrong is that you have the systems and processes to control it. Okay, and if you've not managed to control it, then ultimately you've got the ability to act upon checking those results and improving them. But where possible, where you can control a non-conformance of your goods or service at the point of operation, that allows you to show that you've got a methodology to protect your end client. Then moving on to the check part, so it's your performance and evaluation. So what is it that you monitor and measure and analyze and evaluate all the way through your supply chain? That can be anything from your calibrations and certifications that you do. It can be anything from the assessments of competence, the assessments of the performance that you're doing, through to your internal auditing process, your assessments and checks that you might do on things, and management review is an important feature here. One of the things that's really important to remember about performance and evaluation is it's not simply just a case of checking and writing and recording data. It's about analysing that data. What is that data giving us that can help us drive improvement? Remember, the thing we spoke about is this cyclic approach to plan, do, check, act, using the processes that move from one to the next. If we effectively monitor and measure and look at performance evaluation, then we can identify areas where there are slight weaknesses or they have not performed exactly as what we had expected them to. Based on that information, we can then act upon it. We can then improve on things. So that's taking non-conformities and corrective actions. It's taking our continual improvement process and driving that forward so that when we loop it back to the planning phase, we can think about additional risks that need to be controlled, action that might need to be taken in our support or our operations. Hopefully that's given a sort of an overview of what the structure of the QMS would look like aligned to 9001. So it's important to recognise here that there are a number of quality management principles. Excuse me, I'm just going to take a short break. So quality management principles is based on these 7 fairly universally acceptable principles that have been known for quite some time. A quality management system should be customer focused. It should have support and be driven from leadership. It should have the engagement of people throughout your organization. It should take a process approach to how your business operates. And improvement is fundamentally important. On top of that is evidence-based decision making. Decisions that are made based on evidence, based on improvement activities, based on data you have. And of course, relationship management. Relationship management can work many ways, back down through your supply chain, up into your customers, and across your business in different segments as well. This slide just depicts this a little bit more and gives a little bit more information around those 7 principles. I want to talk to you at the moment about 4 different tools of quality management. So we have quality planning, quality assurance, quality control, and quality improvement. Quality and planning is defined as part of the quality management system focused on setting your objectives, specifying the necessary operational processes and resources you need to achieve your objectives, how you're going to do it, and what it is you're going to try and achieve. Quality assurance is much more defined as part of the system focused on providing confidence that those requirements can be fulfilled. So providing assurance, so that can be part of your internal audit process. It can be part of checks and balances you do as part of your process. So you're giving assurance that as it moves through your process, you're confident that you're going to meet your original planned objectives. Quality control, it's much more focused on fulfilling that requirement and checking that it's achieved. So if we think about a production line, quality control could be different stages where there are controlled assessments done, or it could be a final test that is done as part of quality control. It could be in terms of service delivery. It could be the installation, if we go back to the pump that I referred to. It could be the commissioning and testing that's done on a pump that's been installed. That's the control element to say, have we met the requirements? And then, of course, the 4th one, which I believe is the most important one, is quality improvement. So what is it that allows us to demonstrate that we have taken the 3 elements before, but more importantly, learned from them? Quality improvement is a feature that allows us to grow and become more effective and efficient. So we're now going to move into a little bit more detail about the ISO 9001 2015 version of international standards, giving a little bit more of an overview and detail within the standard, why that standard itself is a good one to follow, for a quality management system. Said before, it's not a necessary requirement to have certification to the standard, but following the standard is a good process to follow and gives you good guidance around what works and what doesn't work well within an organisation. So the structure of the standard follows through from clause 0 to clause 10. The main areas within a business that are important within the standard are from clause 4 through to clause 10, and those ones we'll go into in just a little bit more detail here. So clause 4 is referred to as the context of the organisation. What I would just explain to you here a little bit more is what it means by that, the terminology that's used by the ISO standard. So understanding the organisation, its context, is really about what it is that your business is there to do. Are you there ultimately to provide a service, manufacturing, production, whatever it may be? So it's the purpose of what your business is operating for. And of course, you need to consider the needs and expectations of interested parties within that. And those interested parties can be varied. It can be governing bodies. It can be other set standards and expectations that are required of the products or services that you provide. It can be your supply chain. And of course, it most certainly will be your customers as well. Understanding what their expectations are allows you to have a greater depth and understanding of how your quality management system should be set up and how it should respond to those expectations of your interested parties. So, identifying external and internal issues within your organisation is really important so that you can use a risk-based approach to focus into where those issues may be. And there is no standard that's going to tell you what those issues are. These are specific to your business and often allow you to focus in, and you can use this activity as part of preparing a risk-based register. So these are issues that you're aware of in terms of internally, could be to do with the competence of your workforce, could be to do with resources in terms of locations that you work, equipment that you use. And then what those issues may be and what's expected of you and what you need to consider as you move forward in your business, what your quality management system needs to monitor to ensure that those issues are under control or striving to be improved. Similarly, we would take the same approach with external issues. Are we aware of changes in legislation? Are we aware of changes in standards and expectations within our industry or what's expected of us as a business? And importantly, external to our business, is there a change in the context of what our customers expect to see from us? Is our customers at the forefront of changes that are happening in the industry and looking to bring us along with them? Likewise, from a supply chain point of view, are you looking to get improvement in your supply chain? Are you aware of certain issues there? So it's understanding the concept, the context of your business, so you can really grasp that and use your quality management system to drive it forward. Of course, we need to also know what our interested parties are and what their needs and expectations are. And we need to also understand that in the scope of what it is that we do and considering the output from the steps that we mentioned. So let's just drill down some examples here. So determining the external and internal issues that are relevant to your business and the strategic direction that your business takes. So this could be things that we need to understand that could be issues in terms of changes in our supply chain, changes in our political landscape. We may also just pause for a thought here and say that current changes that could be affecting many businesses just now is around the whole COVID-19 pandemic. It may be that you have not considered this type of situation to have an impact in your business, therefore not be an external influencing factor. Many large organizations would consider this, but as it's something that's a potentially 1 in 100 years, and I do say that potentially 1 in 100 years situation, many would not have considered it to be something within their lifetime that they would be working around. Obviously, as part of a quality management system and using a risk-based approach, we would also consider changes in political landscape, changes in health and other type situations. So if we use this example just now, I would probably refer you in a little bit more details to what sections of a quality management system could work in this area. And this is where we would talk about something called business continuity and disaster recovery. And I would probably suggest that you maybe want to, after listening to this video, possibly go and have a look at our business continuity video. Talks in a little bit more detail what the benefits of that is, why it works well, and importantly gives you some tools and tips and templates that you can get that might be worthwhile for you and your business. So just carrying on with other external and internal issues, that could be loss of key personnel. It could be legal changes in environmental, economics, new markets that you may go into, technical changes within industry or within your business yourself, or it could be large significant changes within your organization to do with maybe your leadership or maybe to do with businesses that you've acquired. Moving on to the needs and expectations of interested parties. What do we mean by that? Very simply, what is our customers' expectations? What are their specification requirements? What are our supplier delivery expectations? What about legal requirements or standards specific to our industry and ones that might be changing? Or industry-specific expectations or waste control. These are just a few examples of things to do with expectations of our interested parties. It's important as an organisation that you need to recognise what these are, both from internal and external issues, interested parties and their needs and expectations. Therefore, you can adjust your management system to align to manage these activities as smoothly and effectively as possible. This slide just talks a little bit about what an interested party is and gives an understanding of it's not necessarily just your customers, but can be much further than that. So in the context of this clause, as part of quality management system, we are considering various factors that would feed into that context. And these are not encompassing everything. They're just an example of what those may be. Each organisation themselves need to understand what are the influencing factors that would impact on their context, and that would ultimately adjust their quality management system. Quality management system itself, in response to the earlier points raised, is they have to be able to demonstrate how that system meets the requirements and provides the confidence that it's working for your business. As I said before, if you have a quality management system that has been a suite of documents sitting in a folder, collecting dust on a shelf, or whether that's a suite of procedures, processes, whatever it may be, that's sitting in someone's computer or in a particular area within maybe a shared drive or location that people don't really interact with. You're not really getting true value from your system. And you want to think about, what can I get if I'm investing the time and effort and money into this system, whether you're getting certification or not? What's it doing for me? What's it giving me in return? And really, you should be able to improve your profit if you have a very effective quality management system. And I would maybe refer you out to another video which talks about the true benefits or the hidden benefits of a quality management system. So we talk about what the QMS will do, who is going to be there to use it and implement it, who's going to interact with it, what criteria we require, the risks and opportunities for it, and importantly, I always harp back to what it's going to do to drive improvements in our business. So with any good system that works well, we really need a leadership commitment to that. So clause 5 has been adapted inside the 2015 version of the standard to try and put more focus in that area. And I think it's quite relevant. My experience over the years, and now 30 years doing this type of stuff in terms of quality and risk management, I think it's important to recognise that good leadership in driving a quality management approach in an organisation is fundamental for it to work. It's fundamental to communicate and pass and lead by example for any business to fulfil the requirements of what they're trying to achieve with the system. They must show their commitment. They must demonstrate from the start, maybe setting policies and objectives, and ultimately they must show that they appoint the roles, responsibilities and authorities throughout the organisation. And I'll just take this minute to pause and say, when we talk about leadership, we don't necessarily mean a board of directors. As I said before, we could be referring to supervisors, line managers, people that have an influence. And we can even include colleagues in that. Some colleagues show great leadership skills where they share and impart knowledge and explain why doing certain activities around the quality management's approach is effective. So demonstration of this commitment is leadership taking accountability for the effectiveness of the QMS working, not just simply using a blame game and saying this is something for someone else to do, but actually interacting regularly and understanding and taking some level of accountability for it. Ensuring that quality objectives get established and, importantly, get communicated throughout the organisation. There's no point setting objectives, high-level targets that no one's aware of. We have to understand that when these objectives are set from if they are set from a high level, that other people lower down in the organisation need to understand how they influence those objectives, both in a positive and a negative way. So it's good practice taking high-level objectives and breaking them down to departmental management level objectives and then down to employee level objectives. And I think it's a great example where organisations show those objectives being broken down into targets and goals within even down to the level of employee performance appraisal. The quality policy. So what is it? What's the main goal that we're setting out to try and achieve and do? It's the high level structure that we communicate to ensure that it's understood and applied throughout the business. Good leadership skills is promoting awareness, and in particular promoting awareness about the process approach and the risk-based thinking that we mentioned earlier, and why that's important to your organisation and the people working within it. Ensuring that the resources needed for the QMS are available. So it's all good and well saying you're going to do all these things, but do you have the workforce? Do you have the equipment to achieve what it is you're trying to achieve? And ultimately, looking to see whether it's achieving what you want to. What were your intended results and have you achieved them? Promoting engagement, inviting people to talk and communicate, promoting the engagement and the improvement of the system. The people that are working in the system, good leadership skills are people that not just communicate outwards, but also listen and get feedback that assist and drive improvement. And of course, it's important that a good leader supports their peers and other management roles so they're all taking a journey for the same level of responsibility and commitment. As you mentioned, the quality policy. It's very straightforward what that's trying to achieve. Not dwell too much on this. Here is an example of a quality policy, top level example of what someone has set out within an organisation of what they ideally want to achieve. And remember, it is a high level expectation. The policy should set the scene and be able to be taken and drawn down into the other supporting systems. So let's just go in a little bit more detail what we mean by good and bad leadership. So here's some examples of some good leadership. Asking the workforce if they feel the system's working for them, the jobs that they're doing. Attending workforce engagement meetings, being present, being aware, communicating with them. Attending sessions, whether that be with a few people or large town halls. Asking the workforce if they can help develop improvement ideas. So if we're aware of bottlenecks or we're aware of areas which have greater risk, involve the people that are working in those areas. Those are the ones that are hands-on, day-to-day, got a feel for it. So speak to them. Can they help in developing improvement opportunities? And also consider other external factors that could impact on employees. So when leaders make changes within a business, they want to think about, well, when these changes are made, could this have an impact on our employees in other ways? Things that we are doing, moving location, adding additional production lines, changing the way we operate completely. What impact is that going to have on our employees? And consider that change and the impact it may have. And also consider the risks. Consider the risks in those areas. Are you putting more pressure on certain people? Are you missing out something that people don't have the opportunity to express? So doing that is good examples, and there are so many more, but simple bad examples, which I have witnessed myself, expecting others to follow a system of expectations, but ignoring it yourself. Not following the rules set by management. So going into areas not wearing the correct protective equipment, not engaging with the rules of the site as required, not engaging with the workforce and getting their feedback, just simply do as I say. You know, it doesn't send very good messages when you ignore certain rules, when you don't follow the system that you are supposed to be embracing and passing out through your organization. And if you're not taking feedback from your workforce and simply just do as I say, you've not got a culture then, or you're not breeding that culture of good quality management. And like I said before, if you have significant changes in the workforce, get involvement. That doesn't necessarily mean that the managing director is walking around the production line or the service team and asking them about how this change will affect them. But it's ensuring that the leadership team take responsibility to pass that information down through the workforce, through managers and supervisors and so on, to get that involvement of the workforce, to get their engagement, to understand about these changes, what impact it may have. Okay, so as part of leadership roles, part of leadership engagement and responsibilities is they have to set roles, responsibilities, authorities throughout the workforce as well. It's all good and well requiring these expectations, but if you don't instill these roles, responsibilities and authorities, then it's going to be a weak system. So moving on from leadership team, we are now looking at planning. So inside planning, we're looking at what actions we take to address risks, and included within that are opportunities. What are the objectives that we set and how are we going to achieve them? And how we plan to manage our changes. This is not the section that talks about the change itself, but how we plan to manage it. So when we talk about actions to address risks and opportunities, many of us, as mentioned, think along the terms of risk being associated to human and particularly associated to health and safety. But if we just take a step back and think of this in a slightly different way, as mentioned before in the slides, we spoke about risk-based processes, risk-based approach, process approach, and combining them together. This is really what we're looking at in this section in a bit more detail. We're also looking at where the processes have undesired effects or bottlenecks or lack of control, identifying where those risks are and trying to reinforce what we're going to do to action them. Likewise, we want to also think about opportunities in terms of what we're trying to achieve. What is it that we are, what objectives we're trying to achieve? So they are seen as opportunities. What risks are there in achieving those? And putting our attention into what the impact might be on those particular areas and what influencing factors we have to bring to the table to ensure that we can achieve them. So remember, we spoke about the uncertainty on an expected outcome or result. That's really what we're looking at in terms of the risk when it comes to a quality management system. The effect of uncertainty on that expected result, how likely something's going to happen and what effect it will have if it happened or did not happen. So ultimately we want to identify what the risk is, determine the severity of the consequences of that risk, evaluate the likelihood of the occurrence, determine a policy or action to deal with this risk, and ultimately on a long-term approach. And we want to monitor and review that the actions we've taken have controlled it. So remember, It's a very similar methodology around health and safety or environmental risk management, but it's looking at a slightly different concept in terms of looking at the uncertainty in achieving something associated to your quality objectives. So by considering risk throughout your organisation, the likelihood of achieving your stated objective is improved. Output is a little bit more consistent, and customers can be confident that they receive the expected products or services that they've purchased from you. If you use this continuous cyclic approach to the risk-based actions and opportunities, then you can have a greater control. You may be able to reduce the actions needed in some areas as processes and activities are embedded into a business and there becomes a greater culture in that area, whereas in other areas you may have other risks that appear that you have to raise the expectation of control in those areas. Quality objectives and how you're going to achieve them. So what it is you're trying to set out to achieve, some of that may come from the policy, it may come from the leadership team, it may be part of objectives that are set upon you by your customers, it may be something that a board of directors set upon you, but ultimately it can be driven right the way down through the organisation. So, but importantly about objectives is how are you going to achieve them? Those objectives should be smart, something that you know that you can measure and can be time bound. And of course, you need the resources to achieve them. So who is going to be responsible? Is it a department? Is it a team? Is it an individual? And is there a timeline around what you're trying to achieve? So remember, quality objectives in your organization is not about, basically eradicating world hunger. That's not something your organization, some will be, but most organizations, that cannot be an objective that's achievable. You have to think about objectives that are achievable to your organization. What is going to be important to you to drive your business forward? And importantly, what's going to be recognized by your customers in terms of reducing rework, reducing scrap, improving on-time delivery, closing out of service requests quicker, the success of completing something 100% of the time to complete satisfaction of the customer. Let's think about the level of that objective and how you achieve it. You simply are not going to turn around and say, well, we're going to double our profits next year without an understanding of how that can be achieved. So that objective, these objectives in many cases have to be broken down. Well, we are going to double our profit and this is how we are going to try and achieve it. And breaking it down in multiple ways. We are going to reduce our scrap by 20%. And if we can achieve that, we can achieve this improvement area, this financial gain, this job prevention or whatever that may be. But how are we going to achieve that 20%? Where we're going to try and aim for, 2% per month, for example. And by doing that, we're going to focus on these particular areas. And we're going to have these teams or these people focusing in those areas where ultimately we want to get to a consensus that everyone's approach to it gives us our 20%. And of course, monitoring and measuring, which we'll talk about later on, comes into that as well. So we've spoken about how it's going to be achieved, who it's going to be achieved, what time-bound measurements or timeline is going to be put to it, how it's going to be measured, and importantly, will we evaluate it? Will we check that the actions we've taken to achieve that 20% improvement have been what we set out to achieve? Or has there been a bit of luck there? Because ultimately we want to evaluate what we're doing is effective. And then going on to another section of planning, which is about planning of changes. Every organization goes through change. Now that change can be low level, simple, or it can be very high level and very complex. Organizations that plan changes well are the ones that are the most effective at coming out of that. And let's take that back a little bit into our personal life as well. When we have changes that go on in our life as well, and as you will know, throughout your life, there will have been changes. You've gone from school education possibly to a work environment or to a senior university or college. Possibly you've gone into a relationship. You've possibly moved in with someone or got married. Possibly you've then had children. All of these things are significant changes. You don't go into them in a personal level without an element of planning. Some are better than others. Some rely on others, parents and things like that. But ultimately, planning is one of the key foundations to success of change. And what we need to think about is, what are we trying to achieve with this change? Not just that we want to do the change, but what is it we're doing it for? What are we trying to achieve? What are the consequences if we don't do it? What if we don't take this change on? But also, what are the consequences if we do? What other impact can there be? What resources do we need to make this change happen? What effects will it have on our current staff and their roles? Are we ensuring that people are aware of that? Are we recognizing that some change can have an influencing factor on other operations, other activities, other people within our business? Are we making sure that we discuss that with them and understand that? And could the effect have a significant change in other areas? You know, changing something that may, in some impressions by some people, see as a very positive step, could ultimately be something that could have a very negative effect in another area. So it's important that we understand the change and the potential consequences, and our quality management system should have the integrity to look and manage that, how we are going to undertake that change, whether that be through risk assessment, through communication, through understanding the resources and the roles and responsibilities. Excuse me for 1 minute. Okay, we're now jumping into support. So as you see, we're going through the sequence of the clauses of the ISO 9001 Quality Management System standard. And I think it's important to recognise that this standard, as I said before, is the biggest introduced standard for quality management across the world. It's the most certified standard globally also. And I think it's a good generic standard that people can use. Ultimately, it's also important to recognise that you have the capabilities to go beyond simply just what the standard expects of you. So into support, clause 7. So inside support, we are looking at the resources of the organisation, the competency of the people within the organisation and the supply chain, the awareness of the organisation around our practices, around our quality management system, our communication methods, how we communicate in our organisation and out with our organisation, and how we demonstrate that we have documented records and information to support our quality management system. So when we talk about resources, it is important that we recognise that it's not just about human resources. Okay, so an organisation must determine and provide the resources needed for the system to be established, implemented, and maintained so that they can continually improve on their systems and practices. And it must recognise that as part of resources, they have to look at the people within the organisation, the infrastructure, the process environment, what monitoring and measurement activities are required, and lastly, organisational knowledge. So the organisation must provide the persons necessary for the implementation and control of the system. It's not good enough just to write a system and, as I said before, have it sitting in those folders collecting dust. You've got to have the people that will drive the system and implement it throughout the business. That doesn't necessarily have to be a quality manager or a quality person per se. It just needs to be the people that have those attributes, people that have been educated or trained or have that experience or knowledge as part of their job, that they have the skills to be able to help implement that throughout a business. It's important also that they recognise that those people may also have the traits that allow them to monitor and measure the performance and gauge in the culture of how well the system's been implemented in the business. We also have to think about the infrastructure. When we talk about the infrastructure, we mean the buildings, the utility services, the vehicles, the equipment we need, not to mention hardware and software, which is so significant these days, and information communication technology. So what do we have or what do we need to ensure that this is possible. If we have a very old manufacturing facility with very old equipment that cannot achieve the specifications that our objectives are trying to achieve, we need to recognise that within our business, that something may not be achievable with the current infrastructure. What about the process environment? We have to consider these days, and particularly linked to health and safety legislation, what's expected of us as a business to ensure that our operations meet those process environment requirements. Monitoring and measuring. So this could be around how we go about monitoring the health of our people, the safety of our people, the testing capabilities that we have. What does that mean? Well, that could be referring to calibration of equipment, gas safety meters, for example. What about the traceability of that calibration? It's all good and well checking it, but is it traceable back to specific standards? What about our lifting equipment? Are we ensuring that our lifting equipment has been certified to the correct levels so that we provide the capabilities for our people to be safe? What about the equipment that we use to ensure that it's fit for purpose in terms of our production facilities or our tools and so on and so forth? And then lastly, inside resources is our organisational knowledge. This is quite an important area. It doesn't get a lot of airtime, but I think it is important to recognise that within many organisations, and I've worked in many similar to this myself, organisational knowledge can be often retained inside individuals. We have to think about that as a weakness and a risk to a business, especially if those individuals are of an age possibly where they may retire, or they are individuals that may potentially move to another organisation. If that knowledge is retained within individuals as opposed to within the organisation, that's a weakness if that person is no longer there or no longer available. And we have to think in a general consensus, if we have that type of operation where knowledge is within individuals, in a general concept, that's a weakness anyway, because that person could get sick. That person could win the lottery and leave. You know, it may not be that they're the sort of person that would move to another company or even that they're close to retirement, but there may still be an element of weakness. How do we address that? Very simple. We try to document that knowledge. We try to work with those people so that they can share and impart that knowledge with others within the organisation. At the same time, good practice is to document what that is, document that knowledge and experience that that person has so that others can learn from it. Good ways of doing that is maybe having lunch and learns, where technical authorities, people with that knowledge and expertise can impart it. You know, providing a 30-minute lunch and learn session once a week or once a month will start to impart that knowledge on individuals. People can be there to document it. So it's good practice to recognise that significant areas of importance within an organisation should be part of your organisational knowledge and not necessarily knowledge that just sits within an individual. And then let's think about competence. So competence in terms of the competence of our people. So do we know the competence levels that's required? So do we understand how that competence can impact on our quality performance? So if we recognise some weaknesses in those areas, then as an organisation, it's important that we address that. We understand what it is that's required. It isn't always a requirement that training is needed. It may be some mentoring and coaching would assist better in that area. Or in some cases, if we have issues associated to competence, because it's due to the desires of the individuals not being in the right place at the right time to deliver the competence that's expected. So we have to ensure that our persons are competent on the basis of their appropriate education, training, experience, and their desire to do the right thing. If we have any kinks in our armour in these areas, then this is where our quality management system should be able to try and capture that. It should show areas of weakness that we try to address and the areas that we try to address. So it is important to recognise many organisations think about putting a training matrix or a training plan in place. And often those things are repeated year in, year out because of legislative requirements or simply because it's something that they do all the time, doing it on a regular basis. Sometimes I think some organisations need to take a step back and do a training needs analysis. What is it that we're trying to achieve? Why are we trying to achieve it? Why do we need this training? And if we've done this training before, have we gone and spoken to the individuals in our workforce that have completed this training? Is it delivering what they expect? Are we getting a return on our investment? And in particular, in times where economic situations can be tough, we want to ensure that we get a return on investment for anything that we invest money into. We like to explain competence, and I'm not going to go into competence in a great detail. There are many other courses out there and videos that will talk about it in detail, but we like to think of competence and the way we explain it as a three-legged stool. And without each one of those legs, there is weakness in competence. So we want to consider that actually we may need to train someone to give them the knowledge they need. We may also have to coach someone to upskill that knowledge so they have the experience. But we also have to consider that we need management to help drive the desire to do the right thing, to use that training and use that coaching and use their systems and processes to gain and deliver that competence. I like to explain this in a way to do with driving a vehicle. So when my daughter was learning to drive, she was receiving continual training. So she was getting training on a regular basis to increase her knowledge of driving. That was ongoing, and as part of that process, I suppose there was a little bit of coaching happened there as well, but generally speaking, she was being trained. She gained a knowledge of how to drive. She gained a knowledge of what was expected to drive. She completed a test and passed that test to show that she had gained the knowledge from the training to respond to how to drive. But at the point where she walked out of that test, would I have said she has all the competence needed to be a fantastic driver? No, and that would be the same for any person, not just my daughter, any person completing that driving test. I would say that they needed to gain their skills to achieve that. And most people gain those skills from experience, from days, weeks, months, and years of driving and being in different situations, and particularly different environments as well. Those skills improve. Of course, you can short circuit that a little bit by giving additional coaching. So she could go on an advanced driving training, for example, that might kind of jump her ahead a little bit in terms of her skills. But there is one last fundamental thing. She has now at the point where she has all the training she needed, passed the test, and she's got, over a year of experience now. So her skills have improved considerably. However, I will point out that in terms of being extremely competent, there must be a desire to do the right thing. There must be a desire to use that training and use those skills that you've built up. If you have a person that deliberately does not want to follow the rules, does not want to use the training they were given, does not want to learn from the person they were coached from, but do their own thing, then actually adding more training and adding more coaching is not going to help their competence. They have the information available to them, but they don't have the desire to use it correctly. And really, in this stage, management have to step in. So it's important to recognise that when it comes to competence. Awareness and communication. Big fundamental factor when it comes to ensuring the organisation have control and are aware of what the requirements of the quality management system is. So what is the policy? What are the objectives that we're trying to achieve? Importantly, what is their contribution to the effectiveness of the system, including the benefits of improved quality performance? So by asking them to do these things, what is the outcome? Why is it an improvement? Why is it working well? And importantly, making them aware of the implications of not conforming to these requirements, not meeting the expectations in terms of the standards, the processes, the levels of achievement that you want from the quality management system. I often use the term, people only know what they know until you tell them what you want them to know. When it comes to a quality management system, often people might not realise the implications of them not doing something, what the influencing factor may be further down the production line, further into the service delivery. They may not understand the impact it may have, and they can only understand that when they're given awareness and communication. It's important to recognise communication can be internal and external, and as part of your quality management system, you should recognise what forms of communication you use, what works best. We hear of companies that often use things like notice boards, putting up things on notice board, particularly if it's a workshop or whatever. But have they actually gauged whether people look at the notice board? Have they actually gauged if it's worked? I've seen an organisation recently that they'd done away with notice boards and used a television. And they had a television in their smoke shelter and they had a television in their canteen. And that television was showing various types of information at various times, just sweeping around, and it was changed on a regular basis. It also recognised individuals that gave suggestions on improvements in various factors, and it worked really well. They did a survey and they identified that people were engaging with it and getting more feedback. So thinking about communication, we have to recognise within our quality management system the method of communication and how we do it. And that communication can also include where there are areas that need significant attention. For example, there has been significant problems or non-conformances in your systems, and your customers are not going to achieve the service or the products that they expect when they expect it. How is that going to be communicated? Who is going to communicate? And what method are you going to use for that communication? Documented information, not going to go into this in too much detail, except to say, it's not necessarily about paper documents. It's not necessarily about Word documents. It's about the method that you choose to use as an organisation. And many of us are now adopting software solutions that allow us to demonstrate a workflow approach to how we manage quality and record evidence of that. So there is no right or wrong way of how it should be done, but it is important to recognise that we have control over it and that the information is accessible where required by the appropriate people in the organisation. So a little bit around resource management. So there are good practices and there are bad practices around resource management. So some of the things we might think about here as good practices, ensuring that you have an induction program for new employees into the business so that they recognise the systems and the work practices required of them. Awareness and communication of fire safety measures, tests and drills. We can replace fire safety measures with information security measures, with business continuity measures. It's that awareness and communication that we have to show that we share with individuals in the company. Completing necessary checks on particular pieces of equipment that may ensure the safety of our workforce and the environment. And what about performance reviews of our employees? Are we speaking to them? And this doesn't have to be necessarily something that's written down formally and discussed in an office. This can be something that's done on the shop floor, at the job, assessing whether your employees are doing the work correctly they're expected to, but also getting feedback from them if they have any areas of concerns, they have weaknesses they feel need attention, or they want to feedback in terms of the support that they get. What about areas where these weaknesses can cause problems? Failing to calibrate measurement equipment. What about if that measurement equipment is used for safety critical devices? What about if that measurement equipment is used for critical devices that you produce that are then sent out to hospitals or care homes or something like that? What's the impact of just that simple mistake of failing to do that? It could be a human error. It could be that someone doesn't have the desire to do it because of a particular day they turned up. Not undertaking necessary health impact assessments. If you've recognised that your people are working in an environment that can impact or potentially impact their health, then if you've recognised that you have to do assessments on that, just simply not doing it. Why? What's the reason? To save money? What about the impact? Not being aware and keeping up to date on legal changes. Now, for many organisations, this may be very straightforward and not very significant, but for many others, this could have a significant knock-on effect, where there are changes in legislation that significantly impact their business. What about failure to service equipment that you use? What about equipment that is relying on providing safe work areas, safe work environment for your workforce? Not undertaking the correct training and competence assessments of your workforce. So not necessarily not giving them the training, but what about the assessment that that training is working? What about the assessment that the coaching is working? What about the assessment that you have the competence in your workforce, or identifying using a training needs analysis of where you want to put your focus? Then we move into the operational clause, clause 8. So we look at planning and control of our operations, what requirements are needed for our products and services to be delivered, where required, is there a design element to our products and services, where we need externally provided services or products, what controls we have in place for them, what about our production and service provision, how are they actually delivered, and is there a requirement that we have a control over the release of our products and services in terms of at the end of our production, once we've installed it, whether we need feedback or sign off for a client. And what about when things do go wrong, which from time to time they do? What controls do we have in place to ensure we minimize the impact of non-conforming products and services that we deliver or that we produce? So you want to demonstrate that you can plan, implement, and control the processes needed for your products and services. So what are the requirements of your products and services? So you may have data sheets, technical specifications, different information specific to your organization, and what are the requirements of those products and services? And that may also include requirements from your customers, specifications from your customers. How do you establish those criteria, and how do you put in place what the acceptance is for those products and services? And how do you ensure that you have the right resources needed for planning and controlling those operational activities you're going to do? So, accepting work at set time when you know that people may not be available, or you don't know that people may not be available in your workforce. You don't have an element of control over that. So understanding how you plan your resources and your workload, implementing that control and the criteria around it. And important, like most of the things in a quality management system, that you're able to demonstrate with confidence that you have that documented information to support how you've carried out those levels of control and planning. What about the specific requirements of the products? So do you have to provide data sheets or specific information around how you operate your products or services? What about how you handle inquiries? Can you demonstrate that the inquiries are handled correctly, that the information is retained and passed on through the organisation? Or do you have the situation where people are having to go back to the inquirer often to gain more information, waste time, potential for error? What about when changes happen? Someone inquires about an order or a project, but then changes occur. The person makes changes that contact you, the organisation that contacts you, or you need to make changes internally. How do you manage those requirements? How about in terms of complaints? How do you handle complaints? Do you look at complaints in the correct way? Do you monitor them? A very good example I had before, and we've got a case study sort of webinar training we're doing on cost of poor quality, where we have an organisation that studied this in a bit of detail for about a year, and they reckon that they were spending somewhere in the range of about £50,000 to £60,000 a year, where they were getting complaints from a customer, going to the site where the service was provided, and identifying that that problem was not related to the work that they had delivered, but related to another service provider. And it seemed to be a consistent approach, that it looked like this service provider was the problem and the client blamed them to come and resolve it. But that meant that that inquiry had to be, that complaint had to be handled by someone, time and effort. Sometimes it meant that management were involved to investigate it a little bit more detail, go on the phone to the customer, time, money. Often they had to drive to the site, They had to go to that site to undertake an investigation, taking videos, doing some tests, time and money. They had to then write a report to then show to the customer making the complaint, this is not our problem, this is a problem of something else. Consistently, they were able to demonstrate that in many, many ways and approach the customer to say, here is an example of 15 situations that happened last year, all consistently the same, where there were complaints. Without the information that they had at hand, without obtaining that information, going through the process and identifying, recording it, and recognizing the costs associated to each of the elements of handling the complaint, they wouldn't have been able to present their case to the customer. But what they were able to do was take a positive step, push some of that back on the customer. So it is important you recognize how you handle complaints, and that's another training video or webinar that you could probably look at on our channel as well. Handling and controlling customer property, if it's something that you retain, establishing specific requirements for any contingency action that might be required. So it's important to recognise also within your requirements for your products and services that there may be statutory legal requirements that you have to fulfil. And it's important that those are recognised also for post-delivery activities as well. Design and development. So design and development is a whole area of quite technical detail itself. It's important to recognise different elements of design and development, and important to recognise whether that is a subcontracted service or a service that you provide yourself. And it's important to recognise that you have to have, if it is something that you do, you have to have detailed documentation that demonstrates generally how you design and develop products and services, and the planning, inputs, controls, outputs, and changes that are managed through that. And it's important to recognise that you cannot exclude some of this area as well. You've got to focus in on that and show the documentation to support it. Also in your operations, you've got to remember many organisations use externally provided products and services. So your supply chain, what does that look like? It can simply be raw materials, finished products that you have. It could be services that you bring into your business. It could be services that go to your client's business. What's important to recognise here is the controls that are required around externally provided products and services. And we like to talk about this in a risk-based approach as well. Some organisations might refer to it as a tiering or a risk-based approach in terms of low-risk suppliers, medium-risk suppliers, high-risk, and possibly even critical risk suppliers. What does that mean? Well, it depends on the level of control you have over them. And of course, it depends upon what they're used for. Every organisation is going to be a little bit different. It's just important that you go through that process and you document exactly how you go about controlling your supply chain. Okay, when you get into supply chain details of a quality management system, there's a recognition of the method and the information that's needed to bring on a new supplier and to manage a supplier in the early stages and monitor them ongoing, particularly for changes, for errors, non-conformances, etc. Your production and service provision are the characteristics and all the things that you go through in terms of the provision of your production and services. And included in that is different monitoring and measuring activities you do all the way through the process, how you formalise them and document them, how you show identification and traceability. And that identification and traceability is relevant to specific organisations. It could simply be that you have a product with a part number and that's it. Or it could be that you have to show traceability right back to a standard of a specific raw material that might be used, and that might be for multiple items that are used in the construction of a particular item or a building or a structure or something like that. So the level of identification and traceability is going to be very specific to your organisation, but you need to be able to demonstrate how you go about doing that. And importantly, within your production service provision is about the prevention of non-conformances, what you try to do to minimise that. And included in that is human error. When there is human error, what do you try and do to try and prevent that? One of the last areas of operations is the release of products and services. In many cases, there is a requirement for customer, third party, or some other body to approve the release of products and services, depending upon the industry you work in. Likewise, it could be a test report. It could be something off of the end of a production line that has been inspected. It could be a QC stamp to say that something has been released. It's the methodology that you would put in place that identifies how you release your products and services and how that would be acceptable to your customers. Inside your operational activities, where you have something that's non-conforming, then you have to be able to demonstrate good practice for the control of that non-conformance inside your production or your operations, I should say, sorry, because that non-conformance can come from service provision, can come from a manufacturing, a building, construction, whatever it may be. Something that's gone wrong, information that's been incorrectly shared, ultimately it's became a non-conformance, whether you've identified it yourself or it's something that's been raised upon you. It's applicable to ensure that the organisation shall deal with the non-conformance correctly, and they have to deal with it in a certain sequence of events. And typically you're wanting to look at, well, can we correct it? Can we make it right now? Can we fix it? So can we rework it? Can we send people out to rework it, to redo the job? So can we correct it? Ultimately, that would be one of the first things. But it is important to recognise that we still document that information, because that non-conformance has driven us to had to add more resource, add more time to correct it, which ultimately means it's been a cost to the business, and we refer to that as a cost of poor quality. Or would we segregate the part, contain it, return the part to a certain place for something to be done? We want to ensure that we control that part if we cannot correct it, that it doesn't get released or doesn't get sent to the customer or wherever it may be going. And we need to consider, do we need to inform the customer? Who takes that responsibility? What method do we use of informing them? And what information do we share? Is it possible that in some cases the customer may accept the part in the as-is release, so they may be given some authorization to you to use the part and sell the part to them, although it might be under some concession and there may be a difference in cost. All of these things associated to non-conformance are about what we want to monitor and measure so that we can drive improvement. So getting into performance evaluation itself. So we've got various things that we want to monitor and measure within our organisation. There is no set rule upon what that should be. It's just important that as a business you recognise where the weaknesses and risks are within your organisation and the areas that will give you the most data that you can act upon, so that you can use that data that you monitor and measure to ultimately drive improvement. So you want to evaluate that information. So when you get that information from your means of monitoring and measuring, you want to look that it's valid, that the information is valid, where it's came from, how it's been performed, and what you can do with it to evaluate to ultimately drive improvement within the organisation. This can come from surveys, from feedback, from meetings, and it may also be done with information fed back to you about how well your market share is, what warranty claims you've had, what service reworks you've had to do, different things that's had to happen either within your manufacturing, your construction, your services, whatever that may be, how long it's taken for something to happen. And remember, when you're monitoring and measuring, you've got to think back to what your quality objectives were that you had set upon yourself and how those filter down through the organisation, because often the monitoring and measurement activities you're doing from a quality point of view are driving towards hopefully achieving those objectives. So in terms of evaluating and analysing and evaluating what those are, we've got to remember it could also be the performance of our supply chain. It could also be how well we have delivered our planning processes. Could be looking at our actions that we've taken to address risks. It could be the general QMS performance. It could be from our internal audit. It could be surveys associated to our customers. It could be the amount of rework non-conformances. We just need to understand what is the right data for us and the data that we can analyze and evaluate. Importantly, as part of any quality management system, is internal auditing. Now, I think it is important to say here that some people believe that every part of a system should be internally audited, or that you should internal audit simply to meet the requirements of the certification of a standard. We take a slightly different approach to this. We use a risk-based internal audit program. And you may want to jump on to LinkedIn or YouTube and look up the video we did on this. What it does is it allows you to put more focus into the areas of potential weakness and areas of opportunity within your organization, therefore getting more return on investment from your internal audits. Ultimately, we have to remember, it takes time, it takes effort from individuals within an organization to do internal audits. So why not get the best we can from that, get the best information that can help us drive our systems forward, rather than just ticking boxes to say that we've checked something. As part of any quality management system, it's important to review the data, and it's important that that data, once it's reviewed, is escalated up back through the management program. Now, it's not necessarily that only managers should attend this type of meeting, but it's important that the information is presented to them to drive improvement, to help get commitment from a resource and financial point of view, also to make them aware of things that are changing internally and externally within an organisation. And finally, clause 10. And clause 10, I would say, is ultimately the most important clause of the standard, and I think ultimately is the most important part of a quality management system. If you do not follow through and put the improvements in place, then the efforts and activities that you've done throughout your system have been fruitless. You know, the improvement activity is what drives your systems forward, makes you better, potentially gains you more customers, gains you more loyalty from existing customers, reduces error, saves money, ultimately. So generally, we want to look for improvements all across our business. So that's why we communicate regularly with the workforce. That's why we ask them how we can do things smarter and better. We want to actually see, from a general point of view, how we can continually improve what we're doing, continually improve our processes, and how we can achieve something. Can we reduce repeating things? Can we stop doing particular things? Can we add an event that allows us to do something smarter? Can we bring in software or technology that can help us achieve something smarter and more efficiently and save us money? Improvements can be looked upon as what I would class as 4 different methods. So reactive. So it's a result of having to correct something that's gone wrong. It's an improvement that's been put in place because something has gone wrong. And then we might look at something from a gradual point of view, how we're going to achieve an objective over a long-term goal. So we maybe want to try and achieve, 0.5% month on month, or X number month on month, or what it is we want to try and achieve. We want to try and get our ultimate goal. It's important to recognize the steps that we take over this gradual improvement program are effective and working, so they should be monitored regularly. There may also be a creative way, using innovation to drive improvement, like I mentioned before. It might be using a software or a technology that allows us to be more creative in the way that we improve our processes, our operations, our services. It may also be as well that being creative in using technology to manage our systems may be better. An example of that would be a couple of years ago, we changed and brought in an accountancy software that has made things much simpler and slicker for the way we do our accountancy, right from invoicing, inquiries actually, invoicing through to our accountancy process. And we've done that and it has been a significant improvement in how we manage these processes, but also has saved us considerable amount of money as well. There are ways and means of doing that across your business that you may wish to look at. And then there are transformational improvements, big changes that can happen, organizations that acquire another organization and make transformational changes, or a new board comes in or a new investment comes in that can make real significant big changes within an organization. But it is important to recognize, as well as in the improvement area, these can come from non-conformances and corrective actions. And the methodology that we like to recognize used for this is that you try to contain it. You try to minimize the impact as quickly as possible. It's important to follow an investigation process to identify the root cause, put in the corrective action, and the most important one is to think about the preventative measure. Has that corrective action been effective? Many organizations believe that the containment that they put in place is often the long-term corrective action when they don't understand that repeated non-conformances come back. And if they do not record that information, it's very difficult to put a figure on how often these things are happening and what cost that is to the business. So looking at the long-term corrective and preventative action is really important in a quality management system. Continual improvement is one of the main areas of a quality system. The main areas you want to focus for, and everything that comes before that is the controls and recordings and monitoring measurement that you do so that you can drive that continual improvement. Okay, thank you very much for your time. We record many videos, many blogs. We would love you to subscribe to us, follow us, and just let us know what you feel about this session. Thank you very much.